We're going to dive in with our next speaker now. So we have been all over the place today. We've been in East Africa, we've been in Costa Rica, and we've covered a whole wide array of really incredible wildlife. Conservation has been one of our big themes for today, and that continues with our next speaker, Dr. Kristen Lear. So she took an early passion for bats, one of these creatures that people are often a little bit, they have some misunderstandings about, they might be a little afraid about. Well, she absolutely loved them as a kid and turned that into an epic career where she gets to go internationally to help protect bats in their natural habitat. In fact, she's the person they call when endangered species are in real trouble. They call her to come in and make sure that they are safe. So she is a wildlife superhero. I hope you are as enthused by the end as she is about bats. And without further ado, thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Lear, and take us away.
Thank you, everyone. That's a really hard act to follow. I'm jealous I can't be out in the field right now, but thank you for having me. I'm excited to talk about some of the work that I do as a bat conservationist. I am going to start sharing my screen so that we can all see some really fun videos and fun pictures. Okay. Can you all hear me or see me?
We've almost got it. Yeah, the moment you go to full screen, it should be perfect.
Perfect.
There you go. Perfect.
Awesome. So thank you everyone again for joining me. I'm excited to share one of the initiatives that is near and dear to my heart because it stemmed from my PhD work, and now I get to basically have my dream job. So I'm going to be talking about Bat Conservation International's binational initiative, Agave Restoration Initiative, to protect endangered pollinating bats in the US Southwest and Mexico. But before we start diving into that project, I want to show a little bit about how I got into bat conservation because I get asked this a lot. My journey as a bat conservationist started at a very young age. When I was a Girl Scout, we would take night hikes and listen for the bats as they flew around and hunted, and you could see them flitting around through the sky. And to me, this was a fascinating thing to see in my own backyard. So in 6th grade, when I was 12, I decided for my Girl Scout Silver Award project that I wanted to learn more about bats and to do something to help protect them. So I built 4 bat houses for this project and put them up in a local park in my hometown of Cincinnati, Ohio. You can see my dad helping me build there, and my grandpa and my mom, who was my troop leader. And this was my first time experiencing what it's like to help bats. And this was my first dive into bat conservation. And since then, I've had many, many opportunities to travel around the world to study bats and to learn how to protect them. So I've been to places like these deep caves with thousands of bats in Australia when I was studying a critically endangered bat species. I've been to pecan orchards in central Texas where we were studying the pest control services of bats in these pecan orchards. And then this took me to my PhD, where I studied at the University of Georgia in the Integrative Conservation Program. And I was a National Geographic explorer. My research was funded by National Geographic. And this was my kind of culmination of the years of research that I had done before. And funnily enough, all the years previous when I was studying bats, I was mostly focused on bats. But my PhD research ended up being just as much about plants, these agave plants that you can see here, and about people as it was about bats. So I was studying the endangered Mexican long-nosed bat. You can see here feeding on agave nectar. So these are nectar-feeding bats that are found in the US Southwest and northern Mexico and throughout Mexico. And I was studying how these bats feed on agaves and how we can plant and restore agaves to protect them. But I was also talking with rural community members in these rural villages in northern Mexico to figure out what they're using agaves for and how can we join bat conservation efforts with their livelihoods to support both these endangered bats as well as the people. And so that led last year, after I finished my PhD, into a dream job at Bat Conservation International, where I'm now coordinating our Agave Restoration Initiative for these bats in the US Southwest and in northern Mexico. So Bat Conservation International, we are a worldwide organization that works to protect endangered bats and all bats around the world to end bat extinctions. And 2 of our missions are to implement endangered species interventions, and to protect and restore landscapes. So this is the interface that I'm working at in my current role. Now, to get into more of the project, I want to give a little bit of background about bats in general. So bats are the only flying mammal in the world. We hear about flying squirrels, but flying squirrels only glide, they don't actually fly. So bats are the only true flying mammal that can claim that unique trait. There are currently over 1,400 species of bats all around the world, and they're found on every continent except Antarctica. So there really are bats everywhere. And some of these bats are nectar bats. So they're feeding on the nectar from flowers, just like hummingbirds, butterflies, bees, moths do. These bats drink nectar, and in the process, of course, they pollinate these plants. So bats around the world pollinate over 300 different plants. If you like bananas or mangoes, what about avocados, chocolate from the cacao plants? What about tequila that we get from agave plants? All of these things are all of these plants that are pollinated by bats. So without bats, we would not have these things in our daily lives. Now, in the US and in northern Mexico, there are 3 species of nectar-feeding bats that are the focus of my talk today. So we have the endangered Mexican long-nosed bat here on the left, and this is an endangered species. Then we have the related lesser long-nosed bat, and this bat has been recently delisted from the endangered species list in the US, which is super exciting, but they're still under threat and we still need to do work to protect them. And then finally, we have the Mexican long-tongued bat here on the right, which is not endangered yet, but we don't know a lot about them, and they are basically relying on the same food that these other 2 bats are. So all the work that we're doing will protect these 3 species. So I want to show the range map here. So you can see this is the lesser long-nosed bat range map, and they're found throughout southern and central Mexico and up into northeast Mexico and then the US Southwest. And the Mexican long-nosed bat is similar distribution here in central Mexico, and then they do come up into Texas and then into New Mexico also. So overlapping these ranges, this is where we're talking about today for our work. And throughout that whole migration or that range, they're migrating over 700 miles between their mating roosts in central Mexico all the way to their maternity roosts in northern Mexico and the US Southwest. And most of the bats that are migrating are these pregnant and lactating females. So they're these females that are undergoing this huge migration while they're pregnant. And during that migration, they're feeding on plants like agaves that provide energy-rich nectar. And you can see the bats get in there and they get the nectar and then they leave, and that fuels their migration. And in the process, again, of feeding on this nectar, the bats get covered in pollen, and then they spread that pollen and help pollinate these agave plants. So this is a very tight relationship between these bats and these agaves. And especially in the northern portion of their range where we can see these red stars, the bats are relying on agaves as either their sole food source or a very important food source. And you can see this is a pregnant female here and then a lactating female on the right. And these bats need these agaves to fuel their migration. Now, agaves throughout Mexico are also used by many different communities and many people for many different products. So we have the products from the sugar and the sap. There's lots of beverages that you can make and get from the sap. And of course, you can then distill the sugars from the agaves to get liquor like mezcal and tequila. The stalks of the agaves are cooked as like a sugar cane that you can chew on and eat. And the stalks are also used to construct houses and fences. And the stalks, as well as the leaves and the flowers, are cut to feed livestock, so mostly cattle and goats. These agaves are an important food source for livestock, especially in times of drought. And then agaves themselves can be planted as living fences, so around property boundaries or to protect crops from goats or pigs getting into the crops. And then agaves can also be planted to help control erosion. So you can see these agaves are an integral part of both the bats' lives as well as the people's lives. And in general, these agaves are an iconic part of the landscapes that they're found in. They are beautiful plants. They shoot up these up to 30-foot tall stalks that have thousands of bright yellow flowers, and they are just gorgeous plants. Now, unfortunately, agave habitat across Mexico and in parts of the southwest US, this agave habitat is disappearing due to things like agricultural expansion, ranching, direct harvest in some cases, and development by people. So these bats are losing their food resource during their migration. And so they're increasingly threatened from this threat. So to put this in perspective, the Mexican long-nosed bat, which is the endangered species, populations of this bat have declined by over 50% in the past few generations of these bats. So this is a big threat that we are trying to address through our Agave Restoration Initiative. BCI is working to restore agaves around the bat roosts and along that migratory corridor to feed the bats, but also provide resources for these communities and for people. So our ultimate goal is to create a climate resilient nectar corridor, as well as support local livelihoods in Mexico for these communities that rely on agaves. And again, this map, I want to show these red stars because this is where we're working. We're working across the northern range of these bats where agaves are their primary food source. And this Agave Restoration Initiative really is a binational collaboration between researchers, government agencies, conservation NGOs, communities, as well as industry. So this is a very big network of people working on this. And BCI is leading this charge to create this landscape scale initiative. And this is really the first time that this has been done on this big of a scale. And again, this requires a lot of partnerships, a lot of great collaborations that are going on, some of which I'll talk about today. So the three strategies that we are using to restore agaves to the landscape are, the first one is to rescue and replant agaves. So this is in places like mines. We work very closely with some mining companies. When they're going to clear some area and they need to clear out some agaves, we work with them, with their company and their employees, to collect those agaves and then replant them in areas around those known bat roosts so that they don't disappear from the landscape and they're still able to provide food for the bats. And this is a really exciting initiative that we've been working with several of these mining companies to do this rescue and salvage effort. Now, the second strategy is to cultivate and plant native agaves back on the landscape. So to do this, we collect agave seeds from native agaves, and you can see the picture on the right where you kind of whack the agave that had produced seeds, and then you collect all those seeds. And we are then planting those in greenhouses and nurseries throughout the Southwest US and northern Mexico. And then in a few years, once those baby agaves are big enough, we plant them back out on the landscape in areas, again, around these roosts and the migration corridor. And then finally, the third kind of strategy that we're using is to protect current high-density agave stands. So in some places, especially in Mexico, you can find images like this, where there's hundreds or thousands of agaves, either naturally on the landscape or planted by people. So we're working with the communities to protect those high-density areas so that they can be food for the bats. And all three of these strategies require very strong partnerships, again, across that spectrum of industry, communities, NGOs, government, all of that, and lots of great strong partnerships have developed from this. So what have we achieved so far? We've been working on this since about 2017 is when it kind of launched in Arizona and New Mexico. And since then, we have expanded to northern Mexico, and we are starting to work in West Texas now. So since we started, we have collected over 150,000 native agave seeds from these agaves around the areas where we're working. And again, we're targeting native plants, we're targeting native species that are adapted to these areas so that they have the best chances of survival. We have supported the development or the enhancement of 6 greenhouses, some of which are in these rural Mexican communities. So you can see here, both of these, this one here on the left is in one of the ejidos in Mexico. And the idea with these greenhouses is that We will then plant those seeds that we collected to help grow those agaves. But the communities can also use these greenhouses to plant things like vegetables, things that they want to either produce to eat or to sell locally. So we're hoping that these greenhouses will not only support bat conservation, but also local food security and local businesses. We are excited to say that we've planted started growing over 20,000 of these native plants from these different areas. And you can see just these little baby agaves they're pretty cute, and they're pretty easy to grow. They're quite hardy. So we've been working with our partners to grow these agaves on a large scale, and then once they're ready, go out and plant them. So we have planted over 15,000 agaves, 4,000 in New Mexico and Arizona, over 1,600 in Sonora, Mexico, and then over 10,000 in Northeast Mexico. And this is just the beginning. We are continuing to expand and continuing to grow our planting efforts. In addition to planting, a lot of the work that we're doing in Mexico, like I said, is community-based. We're working directly with communities to figure out what they need and what they want from initiatives like this. And part of what they want is to have sustainable agricultural and ranching practices on their community land and to have support for those sustainable practices. And so as part of our efforts, we are also creating exclusion areas where you can see they have fencing around these areas that we're planting agaves. But within those fenced areas, the communities can also grow other crops, again, either for themselves or to sell locally on markets. So this is a really exciting thing that we're doing in Mexico in particular, is protecting these areas. And we've done over 380 hectares so far, but again, this is just the beginning of our work. And we've engaged 11 communities in these bat-friendly sustainable management practices. Part of what we're doing is working with local partners in Mexico, local NGOs, to provide training on these sustainable ranching and agricultural practices, and then actually doing some of those soil and water improvements inside those exclusion areas, in addition to planting agaves that the bats can feed on, and the people can also use a percentage of those agaves that we plant. So we're very excited about this community-based aspect of this initiative. And as part of that, we have also signed 11 10-year conservation agreements with these communities. And these conservation agreements are basically a long-term commitment to work together to develop these bat-friendly practices that also support the communities. We're, again, working to expand to more communities, but we have great enthusiasm and support so far. And then we're also working directly with producers of Mezcal. Well, not technically Mezcal, but it's like Mezcal. It's called Bacanora, and it's a liquor distilled from agaves. So one of our partners, Colectivo Sonora Silvestre, you can see this video, they have been working with the Bacanora Regulatory Council in Sonora, Mexico, to develop a bat-friendly Bacanora label that producers can get if they leave 2% of their agave crop to flower for the bats and then make liquor with the remaining 98%. This is having a lot of success. They have 12 producers so far on board and interested in developing this bat-friendly label, and we are excited to be supporting this industry initiative for bat conservation. And I do want to give a huge shout out to the bat-friendly tequila and mezcal label that Dr. Rodrigo Medellin has developed. This has been around for several years in the central and southern parts of Mexico. And you can see this bat-friendly label there. It's actually a sticker that gets put on tequila and mezcal bottles if they allow 5% in this case of their crop to flower for bats. So if you're ever out buying tequila or mezcal, take a look, try to see if you can find this sticker. And if you are interested in learning more about this awesome program, you can visit the 2 websites below, and they provide more information about which brands are participating. And then finally, a huge part of our work is education. So, bats do get a bad rap a lot of times, but people are becoming much more interested in bats and learning about them. So a big part of our work is doing educational workshops with the local communities in Mexico, but also with our industry partners and the general public. So we've done over 20 workshops, and this is a conservative estimate, but we've reached at least 2,000 people. Again, that's probably a conservative estimate at this point, but these workshops are a fun way to engage people, teach them about pollinating bats and the bats that they can find in their area. And so again, it's a very integral part of our work. So what's next? We are, again, this is an ongoing initiative, and we are excited to be expanding our restoration efforts to new areas, to new roost areas around where the bats are, but also to new communities. And as part of that, we want to establish government agreements, particularly in Mexico, as well as additional community-based projects with new communities who are using agaves and want to help with this bat conservation initiative. And as part of this community work, we are looking to support the development of local business enterprises that are agave-based. So this picture here is of a woman entrepreneur group who produces agave products in Northeast Mexico. And we want to support these initiatives and learn how we can help them create these sustainable businesses on their own. And then finally, like I mentioned before, we want to link those greenhouses that we're building and creating. We want to link that more closely to food security and figure out how can we get those greenhouses to work, not just for bat conservation, but also for the communities themselves. So this is all something we're learning. We're bat conservationists, we're bat biologists at BCI. So we are reaching out for new partnerships so that we can make sure that we're doing this in the best way for both the bats and the people. And ultimately, what we're trying to do is to create a landscape across this wide area that has lots of agaves, that will be climate resilient, and that bats and people can benefit from this restored landscape. If you want to learn more, visit our website. We have information about our Agave Restoration Initiative, and we would love for you to check it out. And there are ways you can help. So if you're interested in learning more about it, feel free to check our website out, or feel free to shoot me an email or get in touch. Thank you very much, and I want to make sure we have lots of time for questions.
Fantastic. Dr. Lear, what a cool presentation. I love this story of community conservation and linking industry, local groups, business groups, everyone coming together to really lead to concrete conservation outcomes. It's been one of the themes of our day here today, whether that's in East Africa, here in Mexico, in the United States, and beyond. So really exciting to get to share that story, especially as it relates to a creature that, again, a lot of people don't know that much about and might have some conceptions on. So very, very cool.
Thank you.
We have a bunch of questions coming in on YouTube, which is fantastic, and on Facebook, so welcome into our international audience today. Let's see. Jody wants to know, are bananas and mango, etc., only pollinated by bats or by insects as well? You started with this pollination story. What's the deal?
Yeah, so a lot of these plants that are pollinated by bats are also pollinated to some extent by other animals like insects or birds. But the cool thing about bats is that a lot of times bats are much more effective pollinators. If we think about hummingbirds, for example, hummingbirds are so well adapted to getting nectar out of the flowers because they have that really long beak that they actually don't get very covered in pollen. They just get a little bit of pollen on them. Whereas bats, they need to get really up close and personal with these flowers. And so they get really covered in pollen. So a lot of times these bats are spreading much more pollen and are being much more effective pollinators than other animals. Also, bats tend to fly farther distances than other animals. And so they're helping spread pollen to more distant plant populations, which is, again, more beneficial than some other animals. So bats are really unique in that aspect.
Yeah. So whereas hummingbirds are more like English gentry, bats are like a 5-year-old on pizza day, and it's just all in the face, and they're covered in pollen, and they're all set.
Exactly. That's exactly how it is.
Very cool. All right. Fallon, who's been joining us, I swear, for like 20 hours now, wants to know, how did you become a bat researcher? How did you end up in this field? Because it's very, very cool.
Yeah, like I said, I started kind of unofficially in 6th grade when I built bat houses for my Girl Scout project. But it really was in college when I was studying zoology at Ohio Wesleyan University that I got my first hands-on experience with bat research. So I basically worked during the summer as a field technician in Texas, working with a PhD student doing her research. So that was my first time actually doing research. And then from there, yeah, I fell in love with working with bats and knew that I wanted to pursue bat conservation as my career. So I just basically took any opportunity I could to do more research and more community outreach and work.
Yeah, it's really amazing how many of our speakers come on and they, I think the assumption is for scientists and explorers that they're a genius. They wanted to do this from when they were really, really little. And you did want to do it when you were little, but there's so many winding paths to end up in really incredible careers. And I think that's an important message.
Yeah. And yeah, for me, research wasn't, I mean, I did my PhD, I just finished back in July, but to me, research wasn't what kept me going. I'm much more interested in the community outreach and the actual conservation, like on the ground work. But that doesn't mean you can't do research. Like it's not what I'm the best at, but I made it. So
yeah. Fantastic, and congrats on your PhD. I know how hard that is to get, so kudos to you.
Thank you.
We got a question from Ignacio about the agave. How many species of agave do you work with? And I don't know enough to know if that's a great question, but you can answer.
It is a great question. It is great because there are over 200 agave species, so there's a huge range of diversity. And for our Agave Restoration Initiative, we really work with probably about 8 species. Some of these areas that we're working only have 1 agave species, but a lot of them have like 4 or 5. Great question.
So you shared a little bit about how people can buy products that help support bat conservation. You mentioned Bat Conservation International, which has an amazing website that I brought up below. If someone's at home and they want to help conserve bats, if they're inspired by your talk, they want to go and take action, what can they do at home?
Yeah, so there's lots of things ranging from the easy to the more involved. One of the things that we can all do is tell about bats, right? Share how important bats are and what we've learned. Anyone can do that. You can also support bat conservation organizations through donations or the Adopt a Bat programs that some organizations have, like BCI, where you make a donation and then you get information about the bats you're supporting, and you get, excuse me, and then you get a plush toy, so it's like a fun little thing for kids. Or you can put up a bat house. If you want to do something more involved, you can build and put up a bat house, or plant a bat garden that has night blooming flowers that will attract nocturnal insects that our insectivorous bats can eat. So there's kind of a range of things you can do from the not very involved to the much more involved.
Yeah, and again, a lot of those on the Bat Conservation International site. It really is one of the better websites for any conservation group of a species in the world. So do check that out. Learn how to build a bat box. Learn about those pollinator gardens. So much you guys can do from home. Okay, we're going to wrap up with one question. It's our classic question whenever we've got a researcher on animals or conservationist. Do you have a favorite bat? Is there one that really jumps out? Best bat in the world? Lay it on.
Yeah. Oh, this is so hard. I do love the nectar bats, the ones we talked about, because they, like I said, they are very clumsy when they eat. They kind of just jump on the flower, and I'm pretty clumsy myself, so I very much relate to them. But I also really do love the spotted bat. It's found in the United States in the western part of the U.S., and they're basically like cows. They have black and white spots. And they have gigantic ears that we think they're the biggest ears of any bat in the world. Wow. So just Google spotted bat and you'll see what I mean. They're really cool.
Fantastic. Kristen, this has been so much fun. Thank you so much for joining us at our Ruin Blaze Trails Festival and for sharing your relentless enthusiasm for bats. It's been so much fun having you.
Thank you so much.